guys, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be ranking what I read in January / part of December and doing my February TBR. I've had an incredible reading month in January, I must say, and really the last couple of books I read in December I also really enjoyed. One of them did end up on my favorites of the year, if you've seen that video. I've decided to include those two in my ranking for my January reads just because they weren't in my last. I hadn't finished them by the time I did my January TBR, and if you don't watch my vlogs, I'd like to give you a chance to hear a few of my thoughts on them. So let's just get right into this, starting with the book I liked the least out of all of these. However, I did give it, I believe, 3.5 stars-ish, maybe? It's between a 3 and a 4, so it's not quite a 3. It's not quite low enough to be a 3, but it's definitely not to 4 status. I feel like it must have been 3.5, but like I said, I don't quite remember what I ended up landing on. But anyway, that book is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I know I'm in the minority here. Unfortunately, I did not like this as much as Circe. I just didn't connect with the characters as much as I did in Circe. I felt like the nature of the story this book was telling and exploring was paced in a way that it made it a lot harder to really engage and enjoy the book itself. So it just felt like we were rushing through all of the events and I wasn't allowed to really get to know the characters, even though it is a very character-driven story. Just the way it was told didn't quite connect with me personally. That being said, I did still enjoy it, and I do, as of right now, plan on keeping my copy to maybe try again in the future, and perhaps I'll be in a different position where I'll enjoy it a lot better. Up next, we have actually the first book I read through its entirety this year, and that is The Last Kingdom by Bernard Cornwell. I did give this 4 stars, so like I said, this was an incredible reading month. I had so many huge, great hitters. So the fact that this is at the bottom means that I just read a lot of really good books. So it just ended up there, even though it is still a 4-star read. This book follows Uhtred during the time of the Danes and Alfred the Great, and he is taken as a child by the Danes and really raised by them in a lot of ways. However, he still feels an attachment and he has memories of his time being a part of England. And so he's very torn between these two worlds, and we're exploring that a lot. Really, the only issue with this book, well, there's 2 things I had as issues. One that is a little bit more objective. I mean, it's still subjective because obviously all of it's subjective, but a little more on the objective side. And then one that is very subjective just to me and my tastes. First of all, I just don't love Bernard Cornwell's writing. I've read one other book by him, and he just has this very choppy writing style that I think works with the time periods he's writing about and the types of characters he's exploring, but I just don't like reading it. It just grates on my brain. It is a writing style, however, I can get used to as I continue to read, and it gets a little smoother as the book goes on, so I was able to get through it without just being like, I can't read this anymore, but it's still not my favorite. The other thing is this book focuses a lot on battles, and that's just not really where my interest lies, so I really liked a lot of the parts that were focused on character development and experience, but all of the battle portions and battle discussions just didn't really interest me. So I was kind of, I don't know if bored's the right word, but kind of pulled out of it, less interested in it during those discussions of battle strategy and the battles themselves. So those were some issues I had. However, I did come to love Uhtred. By the end, I was actually surprised by how emotional I got with some of the things that were going on around him, because like I said, there were a lot of portions of this where I was kind of less interested, but something about the story really drew me into Uhtred as a character and his story, and I do intend, as of right now, to continue with this series in the future. I don't know when exactly, but I do plan to continue. Next is a book I rated 4.25 stars, and that was Death by Shakespeare by Kathryn Markup, I believe. If I messed it up, there is the cover so you can see. This is a nonfiction following various deaths within Shakespeare's plays, how they're explored, what exactly occurs in these deaths, and it goes even deeper into discussing the medical realities of dying in that way, what we know now versus what they knew then, what aspects of deaths by Shakespeare are maybe more fantasy than reality, but what also is very factual and surprising that Shakespeare would have understood about the human body, his medical knowledge for the time. It was really a fascinating read, and actually one that I think I might want to get a physical copy of to reference in the future. I did listen to the audiobook for it, and it worked very well for me. I enjoyed it. The narrator wasn't necessarily anything to scream about, but but she was still very good and engaging to listen to. Definitely be careful with this if you are a little queasy or uncomfortable with medical discussions, because it does go into depth about veins and constricting airways and kind of graphic aspects of these deaths, while also keeping it medical so it's not just gratuitous, but it is there. So if that's not really your vibe, maybe skip this one. I will also briefly mention there was a portion that discussed Richard III. There was actually a large portion. Each chapter is discussing a different type of death, so there's a chapter on murder. So obviously Richard III was well discussed in that part, because Richard ends up murdering a lot of people in that play. And she said she did connect a lot of the history plays back to what we know about the true history of these things, and there were a couple things she said in regards to Richard that I felt like were very showed very surface level knowledge of what we know about Richard. I mean, more probably than the average person, obviously. But there were a few things that we know to be kind of just rumors of the time, but we don't have any solid proof about, particularly in regards to Richard wanting to marry Elizabeth of York, his niece, and unfortunately she treats it as that was accurate and that was very real, whereas that was really just a rumor at the time, and we don't know how much of it was real and how much was maybe misconstrued or completely false. So anyway, there were a couple things like that in it that made me question some of the other history she was discussing, but I did have enough belief in her that her exploration of the medical realities were pretty accurate. So anyway, that was a side note just for me personally that I noticed, but still really enjoyed it, like I said. And yeah, it was really a great read and one that I would suggest if you're interested in Shakespeare. All right, now we get into my 3 favorites for these past month and a half-ish. The first one I actually haven't quite finished, but I'm only like 50 pages from the end, and I feel pretty confident in my feelings about it. And that is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, my first classics of the year. I'm really enjoying it. I think it's going to be a 5-star read. All 3 of these are going to be 5-star reads. The one I read in 2022 was already on my favorites list, and these other 2 are probably going to be on my favorites list for this year. Most likely. I should say this one may not be, for reasons that I'll get into in a moment. But this story follows, if you don't know, a young man who is very tempted to commit murder, and early on in the book he does commit murder. And the rest of the book is exploring the aftermath of that, his relationships with other people, his relationship with himself. It's a very philosophical work, but still there's a good amount of plot to keep you engaged and going. I'm really excited that I've enjoyed this so much. I've been reading it throughout the month, just a few pages a day, and I have found that it is very comforting to come back to, which is always a great experience with longer classics when you break it up and you just find that you look forward to coming back to it every day, even if you're only reading, like in this case, 18 pages. It just ended up being so engaging and joyful, and I just really enjoyed it. Like I said, I still have 50 pages left, so I am still enjoying it, although it has hit a little bit of a lull for me, but I'm sure it will pick back up in these last 50 or so pages. Part of the reason I mentioned it might not be on a favorites of the year is I feel like if I read a different book by Fyodor Dostoevsky, I'm likely to enjoy it more than this, just depending on the type of story it is. I really like true crime, and so stories like this definitely are within my taste, but usually books that have to do with murder mysteries, particularly fictional ones, are never really my favorites. They're ones I enjoy and find a lot of excitement with reading, but I don't usually consider them favorites of all time unless they're incredible and explore a variety of different things. This one does enough that it really could be on my favorites of the year, but I do feel like based on my experience with this, obviously it's a translated work. This one's translated by George Gibeon, but I can confidently say that I appreciate Dostoevsky's approach to storytelling, if I can't really quite say his writing style, since obviously it's being filtered. So because of that, I trust that I will be engaged in other works by him. However, I feel like other works that explore different types of stories will probably speak to me personally a little bit more than this does, even though I do really enjoy this. It's still within my taste. It's just kind of within my 4-star tastes, if that makes sense, as opposed to my 5-star tastes, which I am still probably going to give this 5 stars, maybe 4.75, but nothing lower most likely, barring a really upsetting something in the ending, which I highly doubt there will be. But yes, enjoying it, but there are a few things I don't love about it. I will say Russians just tend to wax philosophical, and that's just not my favorite thing. So that has gotten in the way, but overall I am enjoying it. Probably going to be a favorite of the year unless I read something else by this author. Okay, I'm gonna rush through these next two since this is already really long and I still have to get to my TBR. So anyway, Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is my second favorite of this stack. I absolutely enjoyed this. If you don't know, Piranesi follows a man who's in this crazy never-ending house with all these rooms and hallways that go on forever. There's an ocean in the basement, there's a sky in the attic, and it's just chaos, but also very enchanting. And we're just discovering why he's there. What is this place? What does it mean? And there's a lot of symbolism in this book. I will say the mystery involved, I did pick up on pretty quick. I didn't necessarily understand the details until they were kind of explained more, but I did see where the story was going. But that didn't hinder my enjoyment because I felt like there was a lot more to this book that engaged me beyond the mystery itself. And even the exploration of how the mystery came to be discovered and understood, and the fallout of that was also very interesting and thought-provoking for me. So basically I was enchanted by this, really loved it. It's going to live rent-free in my brain, and it was just an absolute wonderful delight. And the final book I can keep very short because I've not only mentioned it in a vlog from this past December, but it was in my favorites of 2022, which I've already mentioned. So most likely you've already heard my basic thoughts on this, but it is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Really loved this. It was heartbreaking. Maybe at points it went a bit far with the heartbreaking aspects for me even, but I still feel like overall what this book was exploring and the characters this book was exploring was just right. It just hit me right in the heart. I loved the characters so much. I will forever remember them. I actually made a playlist for this book, which I don't usually do, but every once in a while a book just speaks to me in a way that leads me to do that. And it was just wonderful and beautiful, and definitely one I would not recommend to everybody. If you hate sad books, don't read this. And if you really struggle with very intense stories about very intense and heartbreaking things, like to the point where it's pretty much consistent throughout the book. I mean, there's happy moments, definitely. There's some balance in there, but it's pretty constant, a lot of the pain. And if that's just not your thing, don't read this book. It's not worth it. But it is beautiful, and like I said, the characters are just so wonderful and lovable, and I really, really enjoyed it. Okay, let's go through my TBR now since I'm done with that wrap up. Sorry that took so long. I should actually briefly mention a couple books that I am currently reading so that you are aware. I am currently reading Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I am actually hoping to finish this by the end of January. When I'm filming this, we still have about 4 days left, but I am just under 50 pages in, and so not very far, although it is just under 400 pages, so there's still a chance I could do it. But I've also been very driven to write recently, so I really don't know what's going to happen, but it will be in my wrap up for February, my ranking for February's reads, because I'm not done with it quite yet by this video, and I'm not far enough to really say where I would put it in the ranking yet. But suffice it to say, I'm really enjoying it. Robin Hobb's writing is beautiful. I am not necessarily as invested in the characters as I hope to be quite yet, but like I said, I'm like 40-50 pages in, so I have a lot of time to get closer with them, but suffice it to say, I am enjoying myself, and hopefully this will end up being one I really, really enjoy. I am also working on The Morte Archer by Sir Thomas Malory. I am currently 124 pages in. I actually should be farther, but I've taken I think all of this week, this last full week of January, excuse me, off from reading this. I don't think I've read it at all. Maybe one day, possibly, but I don't think so. I just have been in a bit of a funk the past couple of weeks, just a life slump in a lot of ways, and so I've slowed down a little bit in reading. Not so much that I haven't read it all, but I've kind of been picky about what I've been spending my time reading, and unfortunately this has fallen by the wayside a little bit, but I do want to continue. I do intend to. And like I've said before, this is really one I'm just going to read until I finish, so I don't mind if it takes me a long time, but I would like to get back into it, hopefully this next week. And then before I get into the third book I'm working on, which is one I'm listening to on audiobook, I should announce, because this readathon is what it's part of, I am participating in Febregency this year, which I'm so excited about. I'm not deeply participating, I'm only reading 2 things for it, or hopefully I'll end up reading 2 things for it. This is a readathon throughout the month of February that is focused on reading Regency books. The hosts have expanded the time period a little bit, so it goes, I believe, from 1795 for them up until the beginning of the Victorian period, so I think 1830 or 1831-ish, around there. And it is being hosted by the channels Jennifer Brooks, Dostoevsky in Space, Tristan and the Classics, and the Bookish Princess. I will link all of their channels down below, and if I messed up any of those channel names, which I don't think I did, but if I did, you can look in the description and find out what they actually are. But I am very excited to be able to participate even just a little bit this year, and first of all, I will mention a book that fills the prompt of to read a book that inspired and influenced Jane Austen, and so I decided to go with The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. This is technically 1 year outside of their set span of time. It was published in 1794, so a year before their span of time begins. However, Anne Radcliffe was writing during this time. This book was influential on Jane Austen. It shows up in Northanger Abbey a couple of times, and so I decided to go with it. Mostly because, well, I want to read it, but also the only book I have that I have not read that was written during this time is Ivanhoe by Walter Scott, and I just am not in the mood to read that. So I just decided to go with this and stretch the prompt a little bit. Like I said, I'm listening to the audiobook of this. I am only about 50 pages in, and I'm enjoying it so far. It is, I've heard this before, and so going into it, I kind of had an idea that this might be the case, but it is kind of starting off as a bit of a travel log of this father and daughter's travels after her mother has passed away. There is a few little like hints at mystery towards the beginning, but it has kind of become just like a travel log, which is fine. That's part of the joys of listening to it on audiobook while I drive, is because I can kind of tune out some of those parts a little bit and just kind of be like, okay, yeah, they're traveling. Although sometimes that leads me to miss important things because I'm just like getting into this rote mood. But anyway, I am enjoying it still. I don't have anything against it beyond the fact that it's a little drawn out in the travel log aspect, but like I said, I knew that going in, so we'll see how I end up feeling about it by the end. The other book I'd like to get to, or at least start in February for this readathon, is one I'll probably also listen to on audiobook, so once I finish Mysteries of Udolpho, I probably will go into this. But this fulfills the prompt of a nonfiction about the time period, or about people from the time period, and I am going to be listening to Romantic Outlaws by Charlotte Gordon. This is a nonfiction following the lives of both Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley, her daughter. I've heard incredible things about it, particularly from Jennifer Brooks, who is one of the hosts, and I'm really excited to get into it. Like I said, I'll probably be doing the audiobook on it, and I'm very excited to finally get into it. I don't mind if I don't quite finish in February, since it is the shortest month of the year, but if I can finish both in February, that would be wonderful. So we'll see how it works out. Moving outside of Febregency, I do have a couple of other classics I'd like to get to this month. First of all, I have here a modern classic to reach towards that goal that I set for myself this year, and that is Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. I have never read this, and I feel a little silly about it, so I decided I'm going to go for it. Really, I put this book on this list because the other classic I've mentioned is one that I've really really been dying to read and just been craving the type of book it is, but it's not a modern classic. And so I felt like to balance it out with my goals, I decided to pick this one up so that I could have a modern classic in this month. I could end up picking something else, but I do feel like I'd really like to just finally get to this so I can say I've read The Diary of Anne Frank. So anyway, that's a hopeful, it may be potentially the first book I read actually in February. This or one of the others I'll mention in a moment are what I'm leading to, and then having this other classic that I'll mention in a moment be the second book I read, because I think I'm going to break it up over a certain amount of time, not the whole month, but maybe a week or two, so that I can keep myself engaged in it. But anyway, yes, I would love to get to this. But the book I was talking about that I've just been craving, that I may end up breaking up over the course of a week or two, is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Yes, I'm hoping beyond hope that I finally end up reading this book. I've just been in a Victorian mood so much in January. I've just been like, I don't think it's hindered my enjoyment of my other books, but I've definitely been just really dying to read a Victorian novel, particularly a Charles Dickens novel, if I'm being honest. So I decided to go for this since it's a shorter one, and I'm tired of putting it on TBRs. I just need to read it because it's been on so many TBRs throughout the past couple of years, and I just feel silly about it, and I just need to read it so I can have read it. So yes, this pretty much certainly will be done in February, barring some sort of strange occurrence. I feel like this is the one I'm going to prioritize the most, and yeah, it should be great. Then I'll end on a couple of books that I intend to read that are not classics that I would love to get to this month. One of them is High Priority. The other is one that I would like to start towards the end of the month if I've finished everything else, pretty much. So the one that is the priority is A Man Called Ove by Fredrik Backman. This is a story following a curmudgeon-y old man who has some neighbors move nearby who end up really impacting him. And I've heard it just rips your heart out. And I have read Beartown and Us Against You by Fredrik Backman, and both of those made me cry. Beartown more than Us Against You, but still, both of them made me tear up and cry, and I expect this one will do the same. Primarily, I want to read this before I see the film with Tom Hanks, A Man Called Otto, which is the Americanized version of the title. I'm not huge necessarily into making sure I read the book before I see the film, but I do like to do it where possible, and I feel like with this one, I just feel like I want the emotions to impact me in word form first before I see it on screen. So yes, I think this may be the first book that I read in the month. This or Diary of Anne Frank will probably be the first ones I read, but like I said, we'll see what happens. My tastes and mood could change, but I would really, really like to get to this one for sure. Not only actually for the movie, but because I do have plans. I've mentioned briefly before that I'm hoping to start a podcast with a friend of mine, and this is one of the first books we plan on discussing, so I need to get to it for sure for that. And the final book I have on my TBR pile of possibilities for February is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. If you're new here, I have decided recently in the past couple of months to read through the entire Cosmere in publication order. I have read most of the full-length novels within the series already, so there's just a few books that will be first-time reads and a lot of like the novellas and short stories I haven't read before. So this one is one of those rereads. I read this several years ago, and I remember a lot about this series, but not everything for sure. There's a lot of details I've forgotten, so I'm excited to get back into it. And like I said, this is one that I'd like to get to towards the end of the month after I've finished those other books, because I just feel like it's one I need to get to because I need to get back into my reading of the Cosmere, but also it's one that I don't have as much need to get to it right away compared to A Tale of Two Cities and A Man Called Ove especially, but also even Anne Frank I just need to get to. So anyway, this will probably almost definitely not be finished in February, but I'm hoping I at least can start it towards the end of February. So yes, that is my TBR, my ranking for the past several books that I've been reading. Let me know down below if you've read any of these, your thoughts on them, if you're participating in Febregency and what you're most excited to to read. I would love to know. And if you didn't know about that readathon, definitely consider joining because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to see what videos the hosts end up putting up during this month. I love readathons that are focused on specific classics, during which the hosts and other people end up posting videos discussing those types of classics. I just found them so comforting and enjoyable. I mean, Victober is my favorite readathon because there's a lot of that. Plus, just reading Victorian literature is great. So anyway, very excited about that readathon. Again, let me know if you're participating. I hope you have had a wonderful reading month in January and that February continues in an upward incline for you as far as your experiences reading. Again, thank you for watching and I will see you next time.